The Snare Drum Etude for this year is a highly rhythmic one, and it's important that if you're going to be working on this for several months, it's important that you start right from the very beginning using the metronome and making sure that your rhythms and you're learning them as precisely as you could. There are a lot of measures in this with quarter note triplets, half note triplets that many students tend to kind of guess at the rhythms, but we can be extremely precise by subdividing triplets within those. Same thing with even just the opening bar. There's a triplet eighth rest followed by a triplet quarter note, making sure the timing for that is solid. If we start with a metronome slow, giving you all the subdivided triplets, you can make sure they're placed correctly, singing the parts with the metronome, slowly increasing the metronome a few clicks faster every time you get it correctly, or after a couple of successful attempts at it, and then pretty much it'll become ingrained into your hands and to what it's supposed to sound like. And that's really important to incorporate that from the very beginning so that you're playing this as accurately as possible. This is a highly technical snare drum etude that requires extreme sensitivity at all dynamic ranges, from extremely soft to pretty loud, and the touch and the finesse that goes into playing this is something that we should all really pay careful attention to as we're preparing this etude. So you'll find that it's extremely, some might say it takes some chops to play, but it's a different sense of chops compared to maybe the marching field, because the control of the stick and what your fingers are doing, and to be able to play this on this very delicate concert instrument is something that we need to be mindful of the entire time. It's important to get on the instrument and make sure you're using concert sticks as much as you can while we're switching between the two, from the marching to the concert side, so you really can get used to how the sticks feel and on this drum, on your concert drum. It's important to develop that muscle memory and that feeling from the very beginning. It's important to make sure that you are very consistent with several things in this etude, specifically dynamics. We have several dynamics that repeat and come back, but they're usually interrupted with some extreme, either a mezzo piano for a little bit, and then we jump up to a forte and then back down to piano. So a tool to make sure that we're consistent throughout would be to rehearse or practice each dynamic section. So maybe start at the beginning with the mezzo forte and then can go down to the bottom line and do the mezzo forte again, so that we can make sure that we have that consistent sound and that right volume every time we have that mezzo forte come back, so that we can clearly hear a separation of all the dynamics that are required for this piece. The roles in this etude are quite interesting. So first we have to determine that this is a concert piece, so we do want to make sure that we do use closed rolls instead of a more open stroke roll that we would find in rudimental playing or marching field. So we do want to make sure that we aim for a consistent quality of rolls, concert buzz rolls throughout the etude. We also want to think about the skeleton of the roll speed that we're going to be doing throughout. So the tempo, when choosing this etude, I decided on 118 to 126, specifically so that it was just on, if you take that slower tempo, it's just slow enough that it still is doable to do the opening triplet eighth note rolls one-handed, instead of trying to squeeze in two hands in there if we're at 118. Anything slower, you might have to switch to two hands. 126, same thing, it still works really well with the one-handed rolls. Making sure that we're not pressing too down into the head. The tendency for some of our softer playing is to really press rolls, and we tend to choke off that resonance of the top head because we're pushing down too much. The same thing also happens when we have a little more technical roll passages, like the second to last line. When we're going extreme from accent rolls, accents rolls, accents rolls, it takes quite a bit of technique to be able to play that. So we want to make sure that we're still getting a consistent, full, beautiful roll sound and not choking off the sound of the drum. If you choke off that sound by pressing into the head with your rolls, that's actually going to make the rolls sound more uneven, more separated, and not as smooth as we hope and we want our etude, this passage to sound in the etude. For some of the more technically demanding passages, especially with the rolls, it's important that we don't go too fast too soon. Have patience when you're working on this etude, and do start off slow so that you can build up the finer muscle movements that we need to execute these correctly. So the amount of fulcrum pressure that we have, the release of the fulcrum pressure as we're going from accents to the rolls, it's really important that we practice it slow. It's not going to sound great when we first, if we slow it down, but in the end, our muscles in our hands will know what we're supposed to be doing, and it'll be much easier, more efficient, and it'll sound fantastic. Taking into consideration our sound that we're producing, when we're exploring our dynamic range for this etude, it's important to make sure that we don't go too loud. When we're at this time that we're learning these etudes, most of us are probably involved with a marching sport at the same time. And it's a completely different feeling, completely different drum, and we might be able to play with a certain amount of intensity at a certain volume on that snare drum, but it's not appropriate for a concert snare drum. We want to produce a great sound, and we want to make sure that we're not overplaying. And to quote a wise man, we don't want to have an offensive sound while we're playing. So always make sure that it's not too much. Same with our softer dynamics. Make sure, again, back to that clarity, and we still hear appropriate snare response.